The stars above Zelani Prime shimmered like a sea of diamonds, their cold light cutting through the dark void of space. Beneath them, the planet's once beautiful surface, now marred by dark patches of destruction, spun silently. Zelani Prime had been a beacon of peace and progress, a jewel of the galaxy known for its crystal cities and serene culture. But now, that peaceful world was a battlefield, a world on the edge of collapse. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the helm of the UNS Defiance, staring at the desolate view on the main screen. The planet below was a fading memory of its former glory. The Cree, a monstrous species of unknowable origin, had descended upon it, and with them they brought annihilation. The message had come in clear and desperate. Zelani Prime's leadership, once so proud, now lay broken and scattered. The only chance for survival was a call to Earth, the human Deathworlders, who had long been regarded as unpredictable, dangerous, and feared for their violent tendencies. Jake, a man hardened by the fires of war, knew something needed to be done. He fought in the Mars Colonial War and survived skirmishes that had left entire fleets broken. But this was different. The Kree didn't fight like any species he'd ever encountered. They didn't fight for territory. They didn't fight for resources. The Kree fought simply to consume, and they were winning. "Captain," Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez said, her voice steady but laced with tension. She looked up from her communications panel, her dark eyes wide with a sense of urgency. "We're receiving a message from the Galactic Council. It's coming from Commander Vexhai of the Zelani forces." Jake's gut tightened. "Put it through, Lieutenant." Amy tapped a few commands, and soon the face of Commander Vexhai appeared on the screen. His appearance was strange to Jake, tall, with translucent blue skin that seemed to glow faintly, and large, expressive eyes that were filled with fear and exhaustion. Zelani had always been known for their elegance and peace, but the crisis had drained that serenity from Vexhai's expression. "Captain Morrison," Vexhai's voice was strained, almost breathless, as if he had been running. "We are running out of time. The Kree are unlike any enemy we've faced before. Our fleets are destroyed. Our cities are falling. Please, you are our last hope." Jake stepped closer to the screen, narrowing his eyes. The desperation in the Zelani's voice tugged at something deep inside him, something he thought he'd long buried. "What do you need from us, Commander?" Vexhai hesitated for a moment before speaking, his voice low and heavy. "We need your help to fight them, the Galactic Council. They have failed us. We need you, your species, to do what they cannot." The words hit Jake harder than he expected. He knew what the Zelani were asking. They had no allies left, and the Council had given up on them. But humans were different. Human warfare was raw, brutal, and often seen as barbaric by the Council's standards. Earth was known for its history of survival against overwhelming odds, no rules, no honor, just sheer willpower to survive. Jake nodded slowly, a grim resolve setting in. "We'll be there. We'll help you fight the Kree." Vexhai's relief was palpable, but it was clear that the Zelani commander still had his doubts. "We have already lost so much. I hope you're ready. The Kree will test you like nothing you've ever faced." "We've faced worse," Jake replied, his voice firm, "and we've survived." With that, the transmission ended and Jake turned to face his crew. The tension was thick in the air. They knew this was more than a mission. This was a turning point, not just for the Zelani, but for humanity's place in the galaxy. "Prepare for jump to hyperspace," Jake ordered, his voice cutting through the stillness of the command deck. "We've got a long journey ahead of us." As the Defiance powered up for its jump, Jake took one last look at the darkened world of Zelani Prime. The Kree had already begun their assault. In 3 weeks, humanity would arrive, but would it be too late? The Defiance dropped out of hyperspace 3 weeks later, its engines humming steadily as it approached the Zelani system. The vast, glittering expanse of space stretched out before them, but the beauty of the stars was marred by the deadly threat looming in the system. Zelani Prime lay in the distance, a world of once pristine beauty now bruised by the brutal scars of war. "Captain, we're in the Zelani system," Amy Rodriguez reported, her fingers moving rapidly across her console. "Approaching the planet now, the situation, it's worse than we imagined." Jake stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the view screen, where the planet's surface was speckled with dark, creeping spots. The Kree had already begun their assault. The city's once gleaming crystal structures were now reduced to ruins, their lights extinguished as if the planet itself had given up hope. What once was a jewel of peace was now a shattered graveyard. The Zelani had lost everything. Amy's voice broke the tense silence. "We're picking up multiple Kree bioships in orbit. at least a dozen large ones and hundreds of smaller attack vessels swarming in formation. Jake felt a familiar tightness in his chest. He'd seen this before, fleets overwhelming a peaceful world, tearing through everything with no mercy. But this time, the odds were different. The Kree weren't just an alien invasion force. They were a plague, consuming everything in their path and adapting to every weapon thrown at them. The Defiance and its sister ships, the Vengeance and Discovery, were humanity's last hope. "We need to make contact with Commander Vexai," Jake ordered, his voice clipped. "Amy, open a channel." A few moments later, the Zelani commander appeared on the screen, his form flickering slightly with the poor communications signal. His blue skin looked even paler than before, the weight of their losses pressing down on him like an anchor. "Captain Morrison," Vexai said, his voice tinged with exhaustion. "You've arrived just in time, but I must warn you, these creatures, the Kree, they will test you. They are unlike anything the Council has faced." "We've prepared for this," Jake replied, though the words felt hollow in his own ears. "What's the plan?" Vexai's large eyes met Jake's. "The Kree don't fight for territory or for resources. They consume, and if they succeed here, they will move on to the next world, and the next until nothing is left. We need to stop them now, or it will be too late." Jake's jaw clenched. "How do we do that?" Vexai glanced to the side, then back to the screen. "We will need to strike at the heart of their fleet, the bioships. They have a weakness. They are living ships, but they rely on a central command structure that controls them. If we can find their core, we can disrupt their systems. But it won't be easy. The Kree adapt, learn from every engagement. Once we fire, they will counter with everything they have." "Understood," Jake said. "We'll take it step by step. We don't have the luxury of time." The communication ended and Jake turned to his crew. "Prepare for battle," he ordered. "We go in fast and hard. They won't be expecting us." The 3 human ships moved into battle formation, their weapons primed and ready. The Zelani fleet, a shadow of its former strength, moved sluggishly behind them. There was no doubt in Jake's mind. They were relying on Earth's tactics to turn the tide. "We'll approach from the east side of the planet," Jake said, his eyes scanning the tactical display. "We hit their larger ships first, break through their lines, and draw them into the kill zone. Once we've isolated the bioships, we target their cores." "We'll need to be quick," Dr. Lisa Park, the science officer, added. "These Kree ships have the ability to absorb energy weapons. We need to stay on the move, use our kinetic weapons, anything that won't play into their hands." Jake nodded. "Exactly. We fight the way we always have, by doing whatever it takes to win." The Defiance shot forward, followed by the Vengeance and the Discovery. The human ships, sleek and agile compared to the massive Kree bioships, moved like a well-oiled machine. The first shots were fired, explosive rounds and high-speed metal projectiles that slammed into the first Kree ship. The impact sent shockwaves through space, but the bioship's energy shields flared, absorbing the hits. "Shields holding, Captain," Amy reported, her voice tense. "We're through their outer defenses." "Keep pushing," Jake barked, watching as the Kree ships responded. Smaller attack forms, like insects swarming a carcass, began to break off from the larger vessels, their movements erratic and unpredictable. They were closing in fast. "All hands prepare for boarding action," Kyle Thompson, the security chief, shouted into the comms. "We need to clear these things off our hulls." The smaller Kree ships latched onto the human vessels, their bioorganic tendrils gripping tightly. They didn't just attack, they sought to board, to invade. But the human crew was ready. Armed with flamethrowers and explosives, they fought back with a savagery that the Kree were not prepared for. Every time the aliens came close, human soldiers fought tooth and nail, burning, slashing, and cutting through the living organisms as if they were little more than weeds. Inside the Kree bioship, Kyle and his team moved through the grotesque, pulsing corridors, their weapons slashing through the alien material. The walls writhed, trying to pull them in, but the soldiers were relentless. They planted explosive charges around the core, prepared to destroy it from within. "Cores set," Kyle shouted over the comm. "Pull back." The explosion shook the entire ship, sending tremors through the Defiance. The bioship's hull cracked open, and its energy shield flickered before going dark. The Vengeance and Discovery followed suit, targeting their own Kree ships with the same vicious precision. "One down," Jake said, his voice steady but filled with grim satisfaction. "Let's keep the pressure on, we're not finished yet." But as the human ships pressed forward, the Kree began to adapt. The remaining bioships shifted their strategy, sending more and more boarding vessels, while their larger ships retaliated with energy beams that ripped through the human ships' shields. "We can't keep up this pace," Amy warned, her voice rising with anxiety. "The Kree are adapting faster than we can react." Jake's heart raced, but his mind remained clear. "We fight smarter, not harder. We outlast them." The battle was far from over. As the first wave of Kree ships fell, the second wave emerged, larger, more deadly. The galaxy watched as the humans, labeled as uncivilized, fought for survival with methods no one had ever seen before. The battle raged around them as the Defiance and its two sister ships, Vengeance and Discovery, engaged the remaining Kree forces in orbit around Zelani Prime. The space around them was a chaos of flashing lights, twisted metal, and burning organic matter. The air inside the human ships was thick with the sounds of alarms, the hum of weapons charging, and the quick, steady voices of the crew, each one pushing to the limit. Jake Morrison stood at the helm of the Defiance, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair, eyes fixed on the tactical display. The ship shuddered under fire as another Kree bioship launched its deadly plasma barrage. The Defiance evaded the incoming blast with a quick roll, the ship's engines roaring as the crew fought to maintain control. "We've lost shields on the starboard side," Chief Engineer Pete Jackson's voice crackled through the comms. "Structural integrity is holding, but we're taking a beating." "Hold it together, Pete," Jake replied, his voice calm despite the chaos. "We're almost through their defenses, just keep us in one piece." On the view screen, a massive Kree bioship loomed ahead, its surface covered in pulsating veins and dark, viscous fluids that seemed to move on their own. It was a beast of a ship, larger than anything humanity had ever faced. But Jake had fought worse. He had seen entire fleets fall, but he'd also seen the determination of his crew, of humanity. "Prepare for another hit," Dr. Lisa Park, the ship's science officer, called out, her voice filled with focus. "Their weapons are adapting to our kinetic fire. We need to change tactics, now." Jake's eyes narrowed. "We've got to force them into a corner. Their shields are weak against direct kinetic impacts. Amy, get us in close to that bioship. We'll hit it with everything we've got." The Defiance surged forward, cutting through the debris field left behind by destroyed Kree vessels. Smaller bioships buzzed around them like angry hornets, but the humans were focused on their target. The ship's weapons fired in rapid succession, launching explosive rounds and steel-tipped projectiles at the Kree bioship, exposed underbelly. The first barrage hit. The Kree ship shuddered, its energy shields flickering under the assault, but it wasn't enough to disable it. The bioship retaliated almost immediately, sending out smaller tendrils of bioenergy to latch onto the Defiance. "Boarding pods incoming," Kyle Thompson shouted, his voice grim. "They're trying to take us from the inside." Jake's grip tightened. "Get ready for a fight, people. We're not giving them our ship." As the smaller Kree boarding pods attached themselves to the Defiance, the human crew sprang into action. Armed with flamethrowers, energy blades, and heavy plasma rifles, they fought with brutal efficiency. The halls of the ship became battlegrounds, the smell of scorched alien flesh and burned metal mixing in the air. The human soldiers pushed back wave after wave of the Kree's insect-like creatures, using every trick in the book to ensure they didn't lose their position. Inside the Kree bioship, Kyle and his team moved through the living ship's pulsating corridors. The walls were alive, breathing in rhythm with the ship itself, and the air was thick with strange, chemical smells. The team advanced cautiously, their weapons drawn, their eyes scanning every corner for the next threat. "I don't like this," Kyle muttered, his voice tight. "These things are everywhere." "Keep moving," one of his team members, Sergeant Rachel Dean, said, her voice steady. "We're almost to the core, just don't let them get too close." The explosive charges they had planted earlier were set to go off once the core was breached, but it wasn't going to be easy. As they pushed deeper into the Kree ship, the walls began to shift, attempting to trap them in narrow, organic passages. Strange creatures, part alien, part ship, attacked them from every angle, their limbs sharp and their eyes glowing with hunger. Kyle's pulse quickened as the first of the creatures lunged. He fired, the shot exploding into the creature's head, splattering it against the walls in a mess of blood and organic tissue. But the creatures kept coming. "Clear the path," Kyle barked, tossing a grenade down the corridor. The explosion rocked the ship, but it didn't slow the creatures. "We need to get to the core now." Just as they reached the central chamber of the ship, the explosion they had set off earlier detonated, causing the Kree vessel to tremble violently. The entire ship groaned, as if it were a living organism in pain. "Cores down," Kyle reported over the comms, his voice cold. "Now get to the extraction point. We've got what we came for." Back on the Defiance, Jake and his crew watched as the Kree bioship began to destabilize. The explosion had torn through the ship's neural center, and its energy shields faltered. The Defiance fired again, and this time the Kree ship didn't respond. It floated lifelessly in space, a hulking corpse in the black void. "We've got one down," Amy said, her voice filled with relief. "But there's more coming." Jake's face tightened. "We've only just begun." But even as the first of the Kree bioships fell, new, larger vessels began to emerge from the shadows. They were bigger, more monstrous, and their presence sent a cold shiver down Jake's spine. The first wave of the Kree had been a test. This was the real assault. "Admiral Kressar's fleet is arriving," Amy said, looking over at the communications panel. "They're moving in, but they're still out of range." "They'll have to wait," Jake said, his voice hardening. "We've got to keep pushing. The Kree are adapting faster than we can hit them." On the other side of the galaxy, the Galactic Council was watching, their judgment clouded by fear and hesitation. The humans were showing them how war was really fought, and the question remained. Would they accept the methods that had worked, or would they fall back into their own outdated doctrines? Jake's eyes locked onto the viewscreen once more. The larger Kree vessels were now moving toward the human ships with terrifying speed. "Brace for impact," Jake ordered, his tone resolute. "This is far from over." The Defiance and its two sister ships, Vengeance and Discovery, surged forward into the battle once more. The larger Kree vessels had arrived, and they were unlike anything humanity had faced. Their bioships, vast and writhing, moved with terrifying precision, their forms pulsating like giant living creatures. They were no longer just ships. They were predators, their hulls a blend of flesh, bone, and alien technology. On the bridge of the Defiance, the tension in the air was palpable. The battle had taken its toll. The Defiance's shields were failing in places, its hull scarred and bruised. Every crew member on board was battered, but none of them were ready to stop. Not yet. "Captain, they're adapting faster," Dr. Lisa Park said, her eyes glued to the data streams flashing on her console. "Their response times are quicker now. The larger ships have learned from the smaller ones. They're changing the tactics." Jake gritted his teeth. "We're not going to outgun them with firepower alone. We need to outthink them." Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez leaned forward from her station. "The Kree are concentrating their fire on our weakest points. We can't keep evading forever. We need to turn the tables." "Agreed," Jake replied, his voice grim. "We need to hit them where it hurts fast." But as the Defiance closed in on the largest of the Kree vessels, the Vengeance took a direct hit. The ship's engines flared with a massive explosion, and the whole vessel shuddered violently. Alarms went off on every human ship, and the cold steel of reality hit home. One of their own had just taken a lethal blow. "Captain, we've lost the Vengeance," Amy shouted, her voice rising in shock. Jake's heart sank. He'd known the risks, but to lose a sister ship, especially one with Captain Sam Carter at the helm, was a blow he hadn't expected. He couldn't afford to mourn now. The battle was far from over. "Communications, open a channel to Captain Carter," Jake ordered, forcing his voice to stay calm. "Now." Amy quickly initiated the transmission, and moments later, Sam Carter's face appeared on the screen. She looked bruised, a few cuts on her face, but her eyes were still filled with determination. "We're still in this, Morrison," Sam said, her voice rough but strong. "The Vengeance has taken a hit, but we've got power back. We're not dead yet." Jake let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "Good to hear. Get ready, we're going to need every shot we've got." "Understood," Sam replied. "We'll make sure they pay for that hit." Jake glanced at his crew, all of them working with an intensity that made his heart swell with pride. They were battered, they were bruised, but they were still fighting. The Kree hadn't broken them yet. "Focus fire on their central cores," Jake ordered. "We need to take down one of these massive bioships and create an opening for the rest of the fleet." The human ships accelerated, weaving through the chaotic mess of space debris and smaller Kree vessels. The larger bioships loomed ominously ahead, their grotesque forms undulating with strange, organic movements. Jake could almost feel the ship's pulse as it locked onto the target. His hands gripped the armrests tighter as he prepared for the next engagement. As the Defiance closed in, the larger Kree ship fired back, its bioplasma weapons sending green streaks of energy across space. The ship rocked under the impact, and alarms blared, but the crew kept steady, their focus unshaken. "Shields down to 30%, Amy reported, her voice tight with the strain of the battle. "We can't keep this up forever." "We don't need forever," Jake said, his voice steely. "Just long enough to deliver the punch." The Defiance surged forward with a sudden burst of speed, its weapons firing relentlessly at the Kree bioship. Kinetic projectiles, explosive rounds, and plasma torpedoes all struck at once, punching through the alien ship's defenses. The Kree retaliated with a new tactic, sending out tendrils of bioenergy to latch onto the Defiance, draining the ship's power and using it to fuel their own weapons. "Cut the power to the shields," Pete Jackson shouted from engineering. "We can't let them feed off us." Jake wasted no time. "Do it." The ship's energy shields dropped just as another wave of energy drained away from them. The biotendrils that had attached to the hull pulled back, their grip loosening. It was an opening. The human ships fired again, hitting the weak spots of the Kree vessel. "This is it," Kyle Thompson shouted from the security station. "We're going in for the kill." The Defiance launched forward again, this time charging directly into the heart of the Kree bioship. The collision was brutal, metal clashed with organic material, and the shockwaves reverberated through the ship. Inside, the crew braced themselves against the violent impact, but the humans kept fighting. Kyle's boarding team stormed through the breach, guns blazing. The interior of the Kree vessel was like a nightmare, pulsing walls, writhing tentacles, and alien creatures that seemed to emerge from every corner. The humans fought back with a savagery that the Kree had never encountered. "We're at the core," Kyle shouted, signaling the team to set explosives around the central neural system of the bioship. "Prepare for detonation." As the countdown began, the Defiance pulled back, retreating as fast as they could. The other human ships followed suit, but the blast that followed was far more powerful than they'd anticipated. The explosion ripped through the Kree bioship, sending shockwaves that could be felt across the entire system. The massive vessel shuddered and began to drift lifelessly through space. "One down," Amy shouted with a triumphant grin. But as the Kree ship crumbled, the rest of the fleet responded. The remaining Kree vessels shifted tactics, their bioenergy shields growing more powerful and their attack patterns more erratic. It was clear they had learned from the humans' tactics. "This isn't over," Jake muttered, staring at the space around him. The Kree had lost a ship, but the war was far from finished. The cost of victory had already been paid. As the Vengeance and Discovery engaged the remaining Kree forces, Jake knew that the true test was only just beginning. The humans had proved they could win with brute force, but the Kree had begun adapting too quickly. They weren't going to make the same mistake twice. "All ships form up," Jake ordered. "We've got more to fight, let's finish this." The stars outside the bridge of the Defiance looked beautiful, but Jake Morrison couldn't help but feel the weight of everything pressing down on him. The battle against the Kree was far from over. Although they had destroyed one of the larger bioships, the enemy fleet had regrouped quickly, adapting to every attack, every strategy that the humans had thrown at them. It was clear now that the Kree were not just another enemy. They were an existential threat to every peaceful species in the galaxy. "Captain, we've received a transmission from Admiral Cressar," Amy Rodriguez reported, her voice tense. "It's coming from the Galactic Council fleet. They want to speak with you." Jake's brow furrowed. The Council had been hesitant about humanity's involvement in the conflict from the start. They had always viewed Earth and its people as unpredictable, dangerous, even barbaric. They'd only agreed to let humanity assist when the Zelani had begged for help. But Jake knew that the moment the Council realized how effective humanity's tactics were, their opinions would change. "Put it through," Jake said, his voice firm. The screen flickered, and soon Admiral Cressar's stern face appeared. The older alien with its gray skin and piercing eyes looked tired, exhausted from the ongoing conflict. But there was something else in his expression now, a hint of something Jake hadn't seen before: concern. "Captain Morrison," Admiral Cressar began, his tone formal, "I've been monitoring the battle. Your methods have been effective, but they also raise significant concerns." Jake didn't blink. He had expected this. "We're winning, Admiral. Isn't that what matters?" Cressar's eyes narrowed. "Yes, your methods are effective, but they are unsanctioned. The Galactic Council has strict protocols for warfare, rules that protect civilian lives and prevent further escalation of violence. What you're doing, It's outside the boundaries of what is considered acceptable by the Council. Jake's jaw clenched, but he kept his voice steady. You've seen what the Kree are capable of. We're not dealing with a normal enemy. They don't follow your protocols, and I'll be damned if I let them wipe out another world because we're too civilized to fight back with everything we have. Cressar's face grew colder. You risk alienating every other species in the galaxy. Your methods could be considered acts of war. Jake didn't flinch. The galaxy doesn't have the luxury of playing by old rules. The Kree are coming for every world. I'm not about to sit on my hands while the rest of the galaxy debates what's appropriate. Cressar took a deep breath as if struggling to remain calm. Your people. You fight like demons. I've seen your tactics, Captain. You fight to the death. You take casualties that no other species would accept. You do not retreat, and that, he paused, his voice dropping, that is what scares the Council. Jake leaned forward, locking eyes with the Admiral. The Council had its chance to stop the Kree before they came this far, but your methods failed. Now it's on us. And if you think humanity is a threat, that's your problem. We're here to win, not to make friends. There was a long pause before Cressar spoke again, this time with a more cautious tone. The Kree have retreated, Captain, for now, but the Council is not happy with your unorthodox approach. We are sending ships to your location, not to assist in the war, but to assess the situation. We need to understand what we're dealing with, before humanity becomes the next problem the galaxy has to deal with. Jake felt his blood run cold. What does that mean? It means, Cressar said with cold finality, that the Council will be sending a fleet to inspect your ships. If your tactics continue to cross the line, they will be deemed unacceptable. We cannot allow humanity to be the galaxy's rogue element. Stand down or face consequences. The transmission cut off, leaving a tense silence hanging over the bridge of the Defiance. Jake stood still, his fists clenched at his sides. The Vengeance and Discovery had suffered casualties in the battle. His crew had lost friends. They had done the unthinkable to protect the galaxy, and now the Council was threatening to turn against them. That's a problem, Amy said quietly, her eyes glued to the console. If the Council doesn't back off, it could escalate into something much worse. Jake ran a hand through his hair. If they want to fight, they'll get one, but right now we've got bigger problems. He turned to Kyle Thompson, the security chief, who was watching him intently. Get ready. We need to secure our ships. If the Council ships are coming to inspect us, we're not taking any chances. Kyle nodded grimly. Understood, Captain. I'll start preparing the crew. Jake looked out the viewport at the Kree fleet still lingering in the distance. Even though they had struck a blow, they were not out of the fight yet. And now he had to deal with the Council, too. The tension on the bridge of the Defiance was thick enough to cut with a knife. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the helm, his eyes locked on the viewport as the fleet of Council ships drew closer. The time for negotiation had ended, and now, it seemed, they were on the precipice of something far more dangerous. The Council fleet was massive, 5 ships in total, 3 of them capital class, with 2 smaller support vessels flanking them. The sight of those ships advancing in perfect formation sent a chill down Jake's spine. These ships weren't here to help. They were here to assert control. Captain, Amy Rodriguez called, her voice steady, but tinged with the kind of anxiety everyone felt. The Council fleet is entering firing range. They're maintaining position, but they haven't made any aggressive moves yet. Jake clenched his fists, the sound of the ship's engines humming in the background. Hold steady, he said, though the words felt like a formality. There was no retreating now. Get me Admiral Cressar on the line. A moment later, the cold, calculated face of Admiral Cressar appeared on the view screen. His eyes were narrowed in judgment, but Jake saw something else there too, an edge of uncertainty. The Council had sent their fleet to intercept, but it was clear that the situation was rapidly spiraling beyond their control. Captain Morrison, Cressar's voice came through crisp and stern. You've defied the Council's orders. We've watched your progress with concern. You've demonstrated a level of aggression that is unprecedented. The Galactic Council cannot allow this to continue. Jake didn't flinch. He had seen the same look on countless commanders before, fear masked as authority. You've been watching us fight for survival while you sat back and debated. The Kree didn't ask for your permission. They're not waiting for the Council to make up their mind. I did what I had to do to protect my people. We all did. Cressar's jaw tightened. You've used tactics that violate every standard of warfare we've ever established. We cannot let you continue on this path. Jake shook his head, feeling the weight of the Admiral's words settle in his gut. He knew the Council would never understand. What's your alternative, Admiral? Let the Kree finish what they started. You think more bureaucracy will stop them? We're the only ones who have fought back. We've fought and bled to protect this galaxy. The tension crackled in the air like static electricity. Cressar's gaze flickered toward the two support ships flanking his capital vessels. This is not about the Kree, he said coldly. This is about control. You're threatening the peace of the galaxy with your methods. You're making enemies of allies we cannot afford to lose. Jake stepped forward, his voice firm. You're wrong, Admiral. You're not protecting the peace, you're stalling. The Kree don't care about your treaties. They don't care about your civilized rules. They came here to kill everything that breathes. If we don't stop them, there won't be anything left to save. Cressar hesitated, his gaze shifting toward the crew of the Defiance. For a brief moment, Jake saw something that looked like doubt in the Admiral's eyes, but then it vanished, replaced with a hardened resolve. You will stand down, Captain, Cressar said, his voice final. The Council is sending forces to contain your fleet. If you refuse to comply, the consequences will be severe. You will be stripped of your command, and your people will be restrained. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. The Council wasn't just threatening his crew, they were threatening to imprison humanity, to remove them from the fight and leave the galaxy vulnerable once again. I'll tell you what, Jake said slowly, his voice cutting through the tension. I'll stand down when the Council is willing to fight for its own survival. Until then, my fleet will do what it takes to win this war. You want to contain us? You'll have to do it by force, and I don't think you're ready for that. There was a long pause before Cressar responded, his voice colder than before. You leave us no choice. All ships prepare to board the human vessels for inspection. If they resist, take them by force. The transmission abruptly ended. Captain, the Council ships are locking onto us, Amy said, her voice sharp. They're preparing to board us. Jake felt a knot form in his stomach. He had known this was coming. He had known that the Council wouldn't stand for humanity's methods, but he had hoped for a different outcome. He glanced over at Kyle Thompson, who stood ready at his station, his face set with grim determination. Captain, Kyle said, his voice low but resolute, if they board us, we fight back. We can't just stand down and let them take us without a fight. Jake nodded, meeting the eyes of his crew. He could see it in their faces. They weren't going to surrender. Not after everything they'd been through. Not after everything they'd sacrificed. We're not going down without a fight, Jake said, his voice steady. Get ready, everyone. If they want to board us, they'll have to come through us first. The battle for the Defiance raged on. The Council had underestimated humanity's resolve. They had believed that the sheer might of their fleets and their civilized methods would be enough to crush any resistance. But they had not accounted for the human spirit, the spirit that refused to yield, no matter the odds. On the Defiance, the corridors were alive with the sounds of conflict, heavy footsteps echoing against metal, the crackle of gunfire, and the roar of plasma shots cutting through the air. Captain Jake Morrison and his crew fought not just for survival, but for their very place in the galaxy. Captain, Amy Rodriguez's voice came over the comms, steady despite the chaos. We're holding them back, but we've got more Council ships closing in. They're deploying reinforcements. Jake's jaw clenched, but he kept his composure. We'll hold the line as long as we can. We're not backing down. Copy that, Captain, Amy responded, her determination clear. On the hangar deck, Kyle Thompson and his security team were leading the charge. The Council had sent well-trained soldiers, but humanity's soldiers were different. They were born on a death world, a place where every day was a fight for survival. The Defiance's crew wasn't afraid to get their hands dirty, and they weren't about to let a few more ships dictate their fate. In the heart of the ship, Jake paced, eyes flicking over the tactical display. The Council was playing their hand, but humanity wasn't backing down. They'd won battles before against impossible odds, and they would win again. Captain, Kyle's voice crackled through the comm. The breach is sealed on our end, but they're digging in deep. We need more time to repel them. Hold them off, Kyle, Jake said, his voice unwavering. We'll take care of the rest. As the minutes ticked by, the Defiance and its sister ships fought tooth and nail against the Council's reinforcements. The enemy fleet was larger, but the human ships were nimble, their tactics unorthodox, and their resolve unshakable. Jake watched as the Vengeance and Discovery maneuvered with the precision of experienced warships. Their crews, battered and bloodied, fought back with the kind of desperation that only humans knew how to summon. Together, they created a storm in space, a whirlwind of firepower and sheer will that rattled the council ships and made them hesitate. "We've got incoming messages from the other fleets, Captain," Amy said suddenly. "It's from the Galactic Council there, calling for a ceasefire. They want to negotiate." Jake's heart pounded in his chest. The Council had finally realized they had underestimated humanity. They'd finally seen the damage the humans were capable of, and now they wanted to talk. "Patch it through," Jake ordered, his voice steady. He had no idea what the Council was offering, but this was a moment he had been expecting. A moment when the galaxy would have to decide what humanity truly meant to them. The view screen flickered, and once again the face of Admiral Cressar appeared. His eyes were dark with fatigue, but now there was something else in his gaze, something that bordered on recognition. "Captain Morrison," Cressar said, his voice low, "we've watched your tactics, your strength. You've proven your resolve, and you've shown the galaxy that humanity is a force to be reckoned with. The Kree were not the only threat we underestimated." Jake stood still, his fingers tight around the armrest. "And what do you want now, Admiral? A surrender?" "No," Cressar replied, shaking his head. "We want a treaty. The Council recognizes your efforts, Captain, but your methods. They cannot be allowed to continue unchecked. Humanity's tactics are too unpredictable, too dangerous. If we are to form an alliance, we need a compromise." Jake's heart raced. "What kind of compromise?" Cressar hesitated before speaking again. "We would propose that humanity join the Galactic Council, but with certain restrictions. Your methods, your way of fighting, they must be controlled. You cannot fight the way you did against the Kree. If you do, there will be consequences." Jake's mind raced. This was what he had feared, an ultimatum. The Council was offering them a place at the table, but only if they agreed to bend to their rules, to play by their standards, to give up the very thing that had made humanity strong. "You want us to change who we are," Jake said, his voice cold. "You want us to be civilized, to follow your rules and abandon the very thing that saved us and the galaxy." Cressar's eyes grew hard. "You're dangerous, Morrison, but you have potential. The Council can't afford another war with humanity, but we can't allow you to continue on this path. If humanity is to join us, there must be limits." Jake looked at his crew, his mind working quickly. They had fought for this moment, and now the galaxy was offering them a chance to be part of something larger. But the price was high, too high. "Admiral," Jake said slowly, "I'm not asking for a place in the Council. I'm not asking for your approval. We fought to survive, and we fought to protect others. We don't need your rules. We need to be free. If you can't accept that, then there is no compromise." For a moment, the silence hung heavy between them. Jake knew that what he said would change everything. The Council's offer wasn't one of partnership. It was a leash, and humanity wasn't going to be caged. Cressar's face darkened, but there was no anger in his eyes, only resignation. "Then the Council will not welcome you. You will be seen as a threat, a rogue species, and if you continue to operate outside our authority, we will consider you enemies of the galaxy." Jake stood firm, his gaze unwavering. "We'll be enemies then, but if we're going to fight, we do it on our own terms, and we'll do it our way." The communication cut off, leaving Jake with nothing but the hum of the Defiance's engines in the silence that followed. For a long moment, Jake simply stood there looking out at the stars, the weight of what had just transpired sinking in. The galaxy had spoken, and humanity had chosen its path. "Captain," Amy said quietly, "what now?" Jake turned to face his crew. His eyes were hard, but there was a fire in them that refused to be extinguished. "Now we get ready. The Council thinks they've won, but humanity's not done yet. We have a place in the stars, not under their control, but beside them. We fight for what's ours, and we fight for those who can't." With that, Jake turned to the viewport once more. The galaxy stretched before them, vast and uncertain. But for the first time in history, humanity wasn't asking for permission. They were taking their place. And no one, not the Kree, not the Council, could stop them.